Hello, Pilates lovers. Welcome to All Things Pilates. I'm Darian Gold. And you twist. Bring the pedal up slowly, very long. And a 1. We're dying. Keep going. You're almost done. And 5, and 6, and 7. Yes, girl. The starting point of Alex Dent's professional journey was the quote from Krishnamurti, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." In today's episode, you'll learn about forward head posture, why it happens, and what you can do about it. Many patients come to Alex for musculoskeletal and digestive issues, as well as learning more about how to improve their emotional health. He uses a combination of his osteopathic, chiropractic, and Eastern modalities to harness better outcomes. Our topic, forward head posture, a condition that affects an increasing number of people. Mobile devices, computers, and just life in general contribute to this condition. I've asked Alex to explain what happens physiologically in forward head posture, and if we have it, how to correct it, and if we don't, how we can avoid getting it. It's challenging for me to have a conversation, a timed one at that, with someone who has such an extensive anatomy background. But Alex, who is calling in from England, will give it a go. Hi, Alex. You there?
Hey, Darren.
Hi.
How you doing?
Hi. Thank you so much for calling in and joining us on All Things Pilates.
Good evening from jolly old England, where we're just recovering from the royal wedding.
Are you still recovering?
No comment. I think my invitation was lost in the mail. That's the only way I can explain it.
It was quite something to see on television, for sure.
Absolutely.
Alex, could you describe for me and for my listeners what forward head posture is?
Sure. Forward head posture at a very superficial level is very observable all around us. You'll see it in people with the head and chin will be thrust forward, the shoulders rounded, the thoracic spine, that's the area between the shoulder blades, will be curved, the neck will be what's called extended, and it's a sort of stooped, round-shouldered posture. So on the surface, it's pretty ubiquitous, and it looks like a pretty simple thing, but actually when you start delving into it, you can really open a can of worms, and it really serves to illustrate maybe some of the ways that I look at my clients' health. The human system, the human being is a very complex set of sort of multi-stacked and nested systems, including the nervous system, the endocrine system, which deals with the hormones in the body, the respiratory system, the digestive system. And because all these things work so well in general, there's the assumption that they're simple, and thus people develop very simplistic ideas about them. And this is really, I think, illustrated with forward head posture, the idea that it's purely a muscular-skeletal situation, it's a purely mechanical situation, and that mechanical means alone are enough to redress it. And so hopefully we'll have a chance today to sort of explore that maybe a little more deeply and start looking at, okay, what role is the nervous system playing in this? And what role is psychology playing in this? How does this structure affect our respiratory system, our breathing patterns, even our digestive systems? And I think one of the things that's really imperative to look at with forward head posture and to understand the fact that this posture of the rounded shoulders, the head and neck thrust forward, is a very deep protective posture of the human body. As human beings, we walk around with our soft organs on display in front of us, unlike other mammals, which are quadrupeds. They're very much more protected. We're far more open in our posture, and so we're a lot more vulnerable. And so the closing down, the rounding over, the arms coming in front of the body are all indicative of a protective mechanism. So yes, computers and mobile devices contribute to the situation, but I honestly believe that the root causes lie within this activation of these deep innate brain circuits, these bodily responses to essentially what is a predator threat, that we've now, as we've evolved out of that situation, we carry through these responses to threat and stress, and they still make themselves visible in our bodies in the same way as they, would have done to our ancient ancestors.
We don't have that kind of threat any longer. Does that mean that this condition potentially is just temporary, or once you have it, you get it for life?
I think unless you get to the root cause, it can deepen and deepen and deepen into form. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. There's an initial response to a stressful situation, which is mediated by the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenal medullary hormones, adrenaline or epinephrine is called in the States, and other hormones. And then there's a chronic phase when you can't extricate yourself from these stresses that are all around you. Your body takes on another stance, which is an attempt to let you cohabit with your stressor. So what will happen is that if you don't deal with the root causes and you just look at, say, the structural musculoskeletal situation, you may give some temporary relief, but that person is going to keep activating those protection patterns and mechanisms, and ultimately that they won't get out of it. But if you do, along with your patient, start to examine and understand perhaps what might be going on at a subconscious level, then they can take control of some of those patterns. They can start to intercede between the unconscious motivations for protection and fear-based thinking, and start to make more, let's say, cognitive choices, starting to exercise the frontal lobes of the brain to make executive decisions based upon information. Now sure, some situations are intrinsically stressful and cause that response, like a near miss on the freeway or something like that. But a lot of the time, these responses is to something that's not so deeply threatening. And so if we can start to examine the behaviors and the patterns of our daily lives, this thing absolutely does not need to be permanent.
Did you all get that? Somebody comes to you and they are not necessarily ready to hear everything you just said. It's just enough for them to stand up halfway straight. Do you start from the outside in structurally before you start dealing with the nervous system and the frontal lobe? I didn't understand that. Could you speak about that?
Yeah. In terms of neurologically, there's lots of circuits between different lobes of the brain and different areas of the brain. So there's the deep areas of the brain, for example, the limbic system, which deals with a lot of emotional response and that sort of thing. But there are neuronal circuits which will pass up into so-called higher centers, which allow you, if you can, let's say, exercise and develop those areas. Let's say with a child who will go immediately from zero to tantrum, and then over the course of normal human development, they're able to halt themselves into a tantrum or just completely living that emotional response. And that's the work of the frontal lobes of the brain. That's the work of the higher centers of the brain. And we can all exercise that a little more in our daily lives when, rather than indulging the emotion that wells up immediately, if you can kind of get the brain working in a slightly different way, it's like, the way I describe it, it's like having a little place outside of time. So the information comes in and you've got enough time to step in there and go, okay, do I choose to follow through with this? Do I choose to get angry? Do I choose to shout, scream, throw my toys out of the pram sort of thing? Do I choose to get road rage? Do I choose to drive real fast behind that guy because he cut me off? Or do I just look at it a little bit more objectively and just say, okay, it's not worth it? That's the role of some of these higher centers in the brain in the way they deal with that emotional content. And it is like having a little place outside. You've got time to not indulge that or to indulge it through choice. So that's what I mean by that. And I forgot the first part of your question.
Well, and just to that point, you're suggesting that people don't go to that reactionary place, that there's a moment there before you make a decision to go off your center.
Yeah, there's a space there, and the more you explore that, the bigger that space becomes. Then that information can come up, and you can make a choice. You might still choose to indulge that, and it might be appropriate to, but there is an increasing space for you to just say, hang on a minute, let me run through this through a different set of filters before we go straight ahead with the action. And in terms of the other thing you asked at the beginning, yeah, you don't unload this necessarily full bore onto people, but through the process of conversation, through the process of my consultation, particularly the initial one, and the way I will handle that, it just gives me the clues as to where the little leverage points are. Because, yes, absolutely, if you try to dump all this on someone, the shutters go down, nobody wants to know. But if you just pick two areas, and then if you're doing some musculoskeletal work, you've got 3 points. You've triangulated the problem. And that gives you a lot more chance of success than just simply, trying to bully your way down one street or trying to overwhelm them with information, which I've definitely done, probably continue to do.
If we go to the spine, especially from the spine up to the cervical spine where the neck is, for those of us who can just sort of picture the neck, the curves in the higher part, and then in the mid back, and then to the low back. When you do have forward head posture, what exactly is happening or developing inside the cervical spine that is pushing it forward? You talked about what's happening in the nervous system and more on some higher planes, but structurally and muscularly, the chest muscles are tight, right? So that's pulling your
Correct.
shoulders forward. What's happening in the actual bones physiologically when someone just starts to sit into that forward head posture position?
Well, you're going to get a lot of the compression of what's called the posterior elements. You're going to, rather than weight bear through the vertebral bodies, which are the large sort of chunky load-bearing aspects, and the intervertebral discs that sit between them, you're going to start to transfer some of that load towards the back and to the joints of the neck, which can lead to, obviously, to wear and tear quite quickly, into that area. It can cause problems with the discs that sit between the vertebral bodies themselves, and particularly, you've got 7 vertebrae in the neck. And I particularly find problems at about the 5th. So you're counting from the top down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then that's where the neck tends to dive forward at that point. It's pulled forward by some of the muscles in the neck, particularly those associated with breathing and what are called the accessory muscles of respiration. So your main breathing muscle, as I'm sure you and a lot of your clients and listeners know, is the respiratory diaphragm. It's like the plunger on a syringe, and it's located between the thorax and the abdomen at the base of the rib cage area. And so when the command to breathe comes from the brain, that muscle should contract and gently descend. That increases the volume of the thorax, the chest, where the lungs are housed, and that draws air in. Now, when we exercise hard or when we're in a stressful situation, we need to get more oxygen in. So we start to use these accessory muscles. And if you ever watch sports, you'll see men and women walking around with hands on hips or hands on the head when they're very, very tired. And what they're trying to do is to fix the shoulder girdle, which allows these neck muscles to lift the rib cage, which gets that extra volume of air in. So when you're in a chronically stressed situation, you're using these muscles all the time, and they're tractioning down. They're pulling the neck down. And because of the inward curve you mentioned of the neck, it's only got that way to go. So that curve deepens and deepens. That 5th cervical vertebra drop forward, but it's pushed down and forward, goes out of alignment, and the whole neck becomes mechanically less efficient.
Someone who has forward head posture, for the most part, probably are not using their diaphragm correctly.
Absolutely, and yeah, definitely. And if you think about any shock situation, you think about it, or being hit in the solar plexus, it's called being winded. The diaphragm can almost get paralyzed, and it's very, very difficult to breathe. And one of the problems that, I and colleagues routinely find with this is that the diaphragm's really not very mobile, and it's held in a little bit of a descended position. Not to go too deep into the anatomy, but the heart and the coverings of the heart attached to the top, the central tendon of the diaphragm. So you imagine if the diaphragm's pulled down and stuck there a little bit, then the heart is tractioned down. And if you look at some of the deeper anatomy texts, there's a French osteopath called Barral who describes suspensory ligaments of the heart. So connective tissue strands that run up from the covering of the heart, up the neck, and actually to the base of the cranium. So they attach to the underside of the skull. So then these cardiac suspensory ligaments are being pulled down by the diaphragm, which is also dragging the neck down and forward. So it's kind of a double, triple whammy. It's a bad situation to get into, but it's not irredeemable.
And then enter Pilates and corrective exercises and stretches. Do you employ Pilates or other kinds of resistance training?
My initial approach is just raising awareness of what's going on. One of my biggest clinical tools I use in this is the Post-it note. Little bright pink Post-it note just with the word breathe written on it, or the word shoulders written on it, or something, just a little aid that they can stick on the side of their computer at work or somewhere at home. And every time they look at it, where am I breathing from? Where are my shoulders? So, for a lot of people, that's a good place to start. Then we'll build in, obviously, body work, and I often give people a lot of pec stretches. The Pilates, as you know, I hand off to my wife, who's far more competent in that field. But, absolutely, Pilates, the genius of Pilates for me, and the genius of Joe's method, is that it's a method that treats the whole organism. And this is one of the problems going right back to the beginning. If you've got a very simplistic viewpoint of things, you're going to tend to look for very simplistic answers. And people will take Joe's exercises, or maybe modified exercises, rather like items off a menu, and try to treat the thing that they see, which is the head being forward and maybe the rounding of the thorax. But that's missing the point. It's missing the point that all these other systems are involved. And this is where, as I say, the genius of Joe's method comes in, is the fact that the classical Pilates repertoire addresses everything. It addresses the breathing. It addresses the function of the spine and all the joints. And in doing so, there's a whole wealth of information going into the body which has beneficial hormonal responses, beneficial neurological responses, so on and so forth. So I think for me with Pilates, I would encourage people not to try to get really prescriptive and say, okay, the shoulders are rounded, let's get you over the barrel a lot, or things. I'm not sure that's going to help, but the real power of the method, I think, is in working with the whole of the body. And I think working with the full sort of range of exercise and the full repertoire, as you will, know 100,000 times better than me. I think that's the way to go, rather than this sort of pick and choose, physical therapy version of Pilates, which I'm not a big fan of.
Before you pass your patient off to Paige, you touched on briefly about stretching out the pecs. That would just sort of give an indication to your patient. They can literally feel you stretching them, because the pectoral muscles and the anterior shoulder is so locked up. So you sort of are preparing them for their Pilates lesson.
And giving them the tools, giving them very simple stretches in doorways, using the door frame to stretch through, like the opposite of a chest press machine, really. But little and often to counteract the tendency to roll forward. It's really, really, it's amazingly, useful. And, I'd use techniques, maybe some postural taping, using the kinesio tape across the shoulders, so you get someone into a position which is more desirable than where they normally are, and gently tape a couple of areas across the upper and mid-trapezius muscles. And then when they start to drift, then they get a little bit of biofeedback. They get a pull on the skin. It's like, okay, my shoulders are drifting. So
I love that idea. And if somebody were alone, they couldn't tape themselves. Is there some sort of brace or fastener that is on the market that you would recommend? Something that could help them pull their shoulders back, maybe without the same feedback, but just to get that opening feeling.
I'm not a big fan of anything, I don't think, that would restrict movement more. I think it's about bringing more natural human balance of natural human movements into their daily routine, rather than restricting them further. Because if you're restricting somebody and they're under stress, I mean, that's a pretty tortuous thing. One of the reasons that stress can have an effect on the stomach and cause ulceration is that when adrenaline isn't used up, then the adrenaline has to be dumped into the stomach. It's an irritant there. If you looked at an adrenaline under a microscope, apparently it's a very sharp-looking molecule, a very crystalline-looking molecule. I think if we can get people to burn off some of this sort of nervous energy rather than being more restricted, the better. I mean, one thing that I think would be really good for someone who's on their own is getting a heart rate variability app. So you can get an app for your Android or your iPhone and a little chest strap, heart rate monitor. It'll measure what's called heart rate variability, which is the distance between the peaks of each individual heartbeat, or a single point on each individual heartbeat. It could be at a peak or the trough. And the more rigid, the more uniform your heartbeats are, that's an indication of a more stressed state. If there's slight variability between the peaks of each individual heartbeat, that's a good indication that the sympathetic nervous system is down a little bit. The sympathetic nervous system, which deals with the fear, fight, flight response, is kind of, taking a bit of a back seat. So that's a way when you're driving or when you're on your own, you have the app up running on your phone, your chest monitor attached to it, just by Bluetooth, and it'll start to tell you, hey, your heart rate variability is dropping, which means you're becoming more stressed. So then you can go, okay, let me check my breathing, let me check my shoulders. What is it in my environment that's causing me to be stressed out? Can I do anything about it? Can I come to terms with it? So I think as a tool, using some sort of a technology like that, as opposed to maybe something that's, more restrictive.
Physical.
Yeah, I think that can be really, really helpful, because you want to get to the root of it. And the root of it is your response to your environment. If you don't get behind it, as a saying that one of my teachers used a lot. If you're not getting to the root of things, you're just rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic. It's going down, and all you're doing is fiddling around the edges. Yeah, I think whatever you can do to get into the realm of causality, as opposed to the more superficial levels, the better.
And you're suggesting that people are not probably aware if they are going into a stressful situation and their heart is starting to move in a stressful way. You're saying that they probably may not know this or aware of it, and this app give them that information.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll be aware of it on one level because they may be acting it out. They may be getting angry or frustrated or agitated. But these physiological changes will somewhat preempt the full-blown, say, emotional response. So it can be really good as a way of catching things before they go full bore, as it were.
It's not like their heart is racing to feel the stress. Right. So someone wouldn't necessarily know.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's not a sense of your heart bouncing out of your chest at that stage. It's just because of the way the sympathetic nervous system is working. It's a rigidity in the signal. It's a very, very, very uniform range to your heartbeat. There's no variation in that. And that's a clinical sign of an increased what's called sympathetic arousal, which is this activation of your part of the nervous system which deals with mediates your fear, fight, flight response. But I guess over time, your brain will learn, how to start to interrupt this before you're even conscious of it. There used to be that video game, there still is, the Journey to Wild Divine, and you'd use heart rate monitoring and maybe skin conductance as well as a way of moving things on a computer screen, and that was a way to train meditation and relaxation. So this technology, this sort of biofeed technology, has been around for a while, but now with these powerful, devices which are part of the problem, right, you can also harness them for good.
I know people are going to want to learn more about you, Alex, because you have so much knowledge. Do you have a website?
They can go check out rehumaning.com. That's all one word, rehumaning. There's an ebook there you can download, a free ebook, which outlines some of the sort of things that we talk about and the way we approach things. Rehumaning@gmail.com is our email. So if anybody would like to get in touch and continue the discussion, then it'd be great to hear from them.
Thank you so much for your time, Alex. I look forward to seeing you and Paige again, okay?
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Darian.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope it inspired you. In order that you don't miss any of the great conversations, please subscribe, as it will also help others find the show. All Things Pilates is produced and hosted by me, Darian Gold. It originates as a live radio show on KPCA in Petaluma, California. Podcast production is provided by Audio Ephemera.
Hey there, I'm Andy, the audio engineer for All Things Pilates. And as cliche as it sounds, I'm also a client. My Pilates practice has strengthened my core and, more importantly, given me a new awareness of my body and its abilities. Darian's approach is challenging but fun, and I always leave my sessions feeling energized. But don't just take my word for it. I recently visited one of Darian's classes, and here's what some other students had to say.
My name is Suzanne. I've been taking Pilates with Darian since November. It's giving me more connection with the subtle movements of my body. I think she's an excellent teacher because I like the fact that she pays attention to everybody's positioning while they're working, as well as giving little tips that make sense to them. When you're in a class, it's so easy to get lost in the group.
Mary, I've been taking with Darian for about 1.5 years. It offers me more core stability in my body. As you get older, really important for balance and core stability. When you have your core strong, it changes everything in your body. Thanks, Darian.
For more information about my classes, my calendar, Pilates resources, please visit dariangold.com. Until next time, don't forget to eat your salad.